So this comment is referring to this book, Besom, Stang, and Sword, which is by these authors, and I primarily know it from its audiobook version as narrated by this person. I apologize for the rather large amount of time between this comment and me actually coming out with this review, but life. But I did say that I would do my own personal review of this book, and here it is. I do think this is a good book with a lot of good information in it, and the way that it presents this information is both honest and, at the very least, researched. You can argue about how well researched, considering some of the sources are people like Cochrane, but you generally know what you're getting into when you get into Cochrane. But effectively, the authors of this book made this book both accessible and really easy to understand from a reader's perspective. It goes over all of the definition it uses, whether it's evoking, invoking, all this stuff. It goes into folkloric witchcraft. And the goal of the authors is to make something as close to traditional witchcraft as they could. And sometimes they go about it in weird ways. Especially in a lot of the early chapters of this, I'm kind of making this face. Especially in the early chapters, which, it happens quite a bit in multiple chapters. They kind of force out that, oh, this isn't Wicca, so much that it kind of feels draining. And I certainly get expressing that fact, but if you do it too many times, it feels like an attack on Wicca. Which even someone who's not a Wiccan, I kind of just want you to get on with it. But the general idea that the authors are going for is a non-religious witchcraft tradition that other people can self-initiate into and have a general basis for things by reading this book. I generally don't go through a step-by-step and judge rituals by itself, because judging other people's rituals feels wrong for me, unless it is inherently dangerous or I believe that there is something problematic about the ritual, and nothing like that comes up in the rituals of this book, which I am glad to say. Some people might consider the book contradictory to itself because there is a chapter on various things, various figures, because, it's irreligious. There's not an innate religious aspect to this book. There's spiritual aspects such as land spirit veneration and ancestor veneration, but it's not tied to a specific culture or religion. Some people might consider certain chapters contradictory to that, including the relatively early chapter on where it talks about folkloric aspects of the devil and its associations with witchcraft and witchcraft hunts and so forth. It vaguely alludes to certain misconceptions about the history of witch hunts and so forth, but that's not uncommon. I do think that if you are new to witchcraft, you will definitely enjoy this book. If you're not new to witchcraft, it's still something nice to have on your shelf. You may not get as much from it, but this is a good reference guide to a variety of things. As I said, the authors are very honest and forthcoming about a lot of the information that's in the book, where they get it from, etc. And overall, I don't think anything in the book is necessarily coming from a bad place. I do, however, suggest just getting a physical copy of this book, or perhaps this book is narrated by someone else, because I do feel like that was a weak point for me. But of course, that's my personal opinion on the matter. Especially in the beginning chapters of just hearing this isn't Wicca, I got particularly annoyed early on. And it vaguely happens throughout the book, and also the narrator, his pacing is not to my liking. But, of course, usually there's you can hear a sample of the book, so you can judge that for yourself from that. And I do understand that the whole trying to get into traditional witchcraft that's not necessarily connected to Wicca is a market, and especially at the time that this book came out was a big market, and I don't think that's necessarily gone down as a market, but I think isn't necessarily things people are looking for as much. But like I said, hearing it so many times particularly bugged even me. I feel like that's something you don't need to state as many times as this book did, is frankly all I'm saying on that. Alright, so I talked about a little bit about the rituals. They also talk, like, obviously, the book is named after 3 tools, so they go into the tools, their meanings, how to treat tools, how to bless tools, and stuff like that. There's even a ritual where, like, if you feel like you have to initiate and proclaim yourself a witch, they have an outline for a ritual there. In the rituals, they also give options. Like, they understand that not everyone necessarily lives in rural communities where they probably have a bit of nature that they can have to themselves. They do have, like, options for people who live in urban areas and apartments, which I think is a nice consideration for a lot of people because urban magical practitioners, especially when they're new, do have a habit of feeling left out if they don't have access to a park at night or something. And in many areas, that's not necessarily a safe place to be. So, including that section of the community, I do think is really important, and I'm glad that the book goes through that. This is one of the rare spirituality books that I would say that the star rating is about accurate at 4.4 here. I generally prefer just straight up whole numbers when it comes to stars, but effectively, yeah, 4 out of 5 is about right. And I do think that if you're going to bring percentages and decimal points into it, that it is realistically a little higher than that without quite being a 5. The main thing that holds it back within its own context would be it's, as I said, it's trying too hard to express it's not Wiccan. They have a lot of other points that they do try to reinforce, though I do think that's less bothersome, at least to me personally. But for other people, that may have also been a factor in their rating. The book is also really good in the aspect of they admit that what they call the Black Tree tradition in this is their own formation. They don't try to claim that, oh, this is a tradition of so many years back because of this, this, and this. They admit that they're taking their collective knowledge and putting it into a format. The chapters in this book also flow really good, as, for instance, it talks about the tools before the rituals in which you will need those tools, introducing you to the context and use before going through how to use. So I would say, despite some of the contradictory nature of it, the overall book is excellent, and certainly worth looking at yourself. My next review is The Once Unknown Familiar, whose cover very much gave me Buffy vibes, whose author has a degree in clinical psychology, which gives me high expectations, but if it doesn't meet those expectations, it's gonna be bad. Thank you for watching.